Welcome to episode 42 of Military Veterans Podcast, where we talk to veterans to learn about their stories and experiences. And today we're joined by Marty Strong. Hey, Marty.
Hey, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. It's early here in the US, but so far so good.
Well, I thank you for getting up nice and early. I'm sure you do that anyway as we learn about who you are and where you come from. But you mentioned America. So whereabouts are you in this world? We don't need the street name, just a ballpark.
I'm in Virginia Beach, so it's on the east coast of the state of Virginia, about 250 miles south of Washington, D.C.
Nice. That is nice because I've been there one time and it was an amazing morning walk across the beach. So it's a lovely area to live in. So we are doing a remote recording, and for whatever reason, I have no idea why, my camera looks terrible today. So I apologize for the recording aspect, but your camera looks really sharp. So if you've not watched this on YouTube, jump on, have a look at Marty because he looks sharp.
Yeah, maybe my camera's bad and I just look that good.
Maybe, or the filters have got that good. I'm joking. I need filters on mine. Great. Well, Marty, I'm really excited to learn about your time in the military. But we do have those 4 questions that we have at the beginning of every episode. So let's start with the first question is, when did you join the military?
Well, I officially joined the military in 1975 on what the U.S. Navy calls the early entry program. So I was 16 years old. I forged my name on the documents while the Navy recruiter sat in another room, knowing what I was doing because my mother was an alcoholic and not really capable of signing the paperwork. And
Okay.
then I
Well,
went to
we'll
boot
we'll,
camp when I
we'll
was
dive
17.
we'll dive back into that for sure. So the next question is, what service and branch did you join?
United States Navy.
United
And
States Navy.
yeah, started out as an air traffic controller radar student, finished the course, and then my orders got screwed up. I ended up at Navy SEAL training.
Okay. Well, again, I would love to hear that story. The third question is, how long did you serve for?
20 years, half as an enlisted SEAL and half as an officer.
Roger. Okay. Okay. And then the last question is, what rank did you get to?
So I was a E7, or what's called a chief in the U.S. Navy when I went to officers candidate school, and I retired as a lieutenant.
Nice. Nice. And I will be interested to hear what that kind of like crossover is like for you as a person. However, before we get there, let's rewind the clock. Where was you born and where did you grow up?
So I was born in Sidney, Nebraska, which is out on the far left of the state of Nebraska, dead center in the United States. And I moved around, I guess, when I was 3 years old to Omaha, which is the largest city on the exact opposite side of the state. And grew up there until I was 11. And then my family moved to Japan for 4 years. My father was working for the U.S. government, and my parents got divorced during the end of that 4 year period. So my mom, myself, my siblings moved back to the house we had rented out in Omaha, and then she kicked me out of the house, and I ended up going to live with my dad in Hawaii. And then
Wow.
he got uh, a change of orders again. He wasn't in the military; he just worked for the Department of the Army. So he got a change of orders to Detroit, Michigan. So my senior year of high school, I ended up graduating out of Grosse Pointe South in Michigan, which was a suburb of Detroit.
Okay. Wow, there's quite a lot of moving around. Can you remember Japan much? Like what age
Oh
was you
yeah,
when you were there?
11 through 14.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
And you said 4 years you were there. So
right.
what was that like living in Japan?
It was interesting in that we had to stay on the military bases. So there were what they would call operating bases, or kind of like think of the business bases, and then there were housing bases. There were separate, like little islands that you got to through the military bus system. The Army had their little cluster of operating bases and housing bases. The Air Force and the Navy had the same thing, and the it was kind of like a a completely self-contained environment. You had the schools, you had obviously the places for the adults to go to work. You had an incredible sports system, every single kind of sport you can imagine, every level from 8 years all the way up through senior and high school. So you could play every sport all day long, all year long, the whole time you were there because they were trying to keep the kids busy. And
Okay.
then you would also do intramural fights between Army and Navy, and Navy and Air Force, and Army, Navy, Air Force. And so it was a very interesting way to spend 4 years as a kid.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sounds it. And did you get out to go and see the country much? Did you travel much within Japan?
Yeah, every year, I think there were 3 major field trips. So you figure that's 12, right? Is that right? Yeah, 3 times 4. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
you're
12
right.
field trips where you'd actually go and stay for 3 or 4 days someplace. So you would go to like the temple city of Nikko and see, the famous monkeys that see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil.
Ah,
You see
yeah.
it where it actually came from. It's carved in a temple, and you'd go to Mount Fuji. I used to climb Mount Fuji when I was 14. We
Wow.
went to the Japanese Imperial Museum to see all the history of the samurai. And I mean, you went all over the place, and you'd spend days and days. And they had people that would, like tour guides for kids, taking you around, showing you everything, there was to know about Japan. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was an incredible experience, from that end of the deal too.
Wow. Okay. And during your time at school, within the US and also over in Japan, was you pretty good at anything in particular? Was you quite an academical kid or a sports kid, or what kind of kid were you?
I was really good at swimming. I,
Okay.
I learned how to swim when I was 8. I was in competitive swim teams all the way through to my junior year of high school, winter and summer competition leagues. Obviously, that's kind of what do you call it? A foreshadowing of my future as a
Yeah.
SEAL. But yeah, so I was really good at that, and it also made me very comfortable eventually when I was in Hawaii, surfing and being around big waves again, kind of a foreshadowing of what I was going to be exposed to as a SEAL. The Academically, I think my dad and my mom really got me into reading at a really young age. So I was a voracious reader, mostly novels. But then my dad realized that I was kind of wasting, or he thought wasting my time doing nothing but reading novels. So he decided to have me read very, very serious books for my allowance. So
Okay.
right around the time I was about 14, suddenly I'm reading the Hindu Upanishads and the Book of Mormon and the Bible and Spinoza and all, Gant, all kinds of philosophers and theologians and historical books. And then I had to give kind of an oral feedback to my dad to make sure that I'd actually read the thing. And he'd read the books, they were out of his library. And then I would get my allowance. And however long it took for me to read the book was up to me.
Right.
And the allowance was always the same. It was around 25 bucks, which was a lot of money. And I couldn't consume those books in 1 week. So usually I'd average around 2 weeks. So I became really good at reading, studying, reading fairly quickly and absorbing, and then being able to kind of recant what I learned at the gist of what I'd read. Again, kind of an interesting skill set because that's very, very useful later on in life, whether you're in university or in the business world. So that I think became a strength of mine because of that. My love of reading got, kind of converted into a love of learning through books because you can have access to those anywhere usually. So
Yeah.
that became kind of a lifelong passion of mine.
That's pretty cool. That's a good incentive, and the fact that you lapped it up was really good. And like you say, you became a better person for it. And then you mentioned that you went over to Hawaii. So what age were you there when you headed over to Hawaii?
I think it was 15. Yeah, I was 15. It was I think the fall of the year that I was 15, and so I lived in a little apartment complex not too far from my school. I was probably about 15 blocks straight up the mountainside from Waikiki.
Ooh,
And
okay.
so, you could come out and you could see Waikiki and Diamond Head off to the left, and another extinct volcano that was on the edge of our neighborhood called the Punch Bowl, which has got the National Cemetery of the Pacific inside. It's a dormant volcano. And yeah, I mean, learned how to surf. Most people don't know this, but Diamond Head has a crater music festival in it every year. So that, that
Ah,
that actually was used by the U.S. Army as an ammunition storage site. So there's tunnels on the inside bored into the ring. Diamond Head's actually like, a big circle. On the side, it's
yeah,
always that one profile, right? So you can get in through a tunnel, and then there's this massive open space with tunnels built in all the way around the internal ridge. So perfect venue for putting up 4 or 5 different music band sites, and it was a big deal. So it's a very festive, very cool place to grow up
Yeah, 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 yeah.
and to spend a couple years.
Yeah, I was very very lucky to go to Hawaii for the first time in March this year, and I hiked up Diamond Head, um,
Okay.
and it's great, like amazing views, and yeah, went into a few of those tunnels, probably not the ones you're mentioning, but they've got a part of the walkway, and you can the lookouts over the sea, yeah, an amazing thing. But the fact that they do music there, I bet that's really cool to experience. So
Yeah, and some pretty good name bands back in those days too. So yeah, and so there was always something to do. There's and a
yeah,
lot of physical things to do, like you said. There's hiking and walking and surfing and swimming. And I played sports again the whole time I was there. I played football, track, and basketball. And so yeah, it was just kind of an extension of Hawaii in some ways. Excuse me,
yeah,
of my life in Japan. It's
Japan, yeah, over to
lots and
Hawaii.
lots of extracurricular activity, a lot of access to sports and good things to
That's
do.
that's really cool. And you mentioned about doing all those different things and different sports. And what got me is getting up at 6:30 in the morning, going down to the beach for a nice walk, and families are out. Like families are out walking their dog and doing stuff at
Hmm.
6:30 in the morning. And I think that's just great. And then people down at, is it Pipe? Oh, it's Pipe something where they do all the surfing.
Pipeline, that's in the north. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I
but
drove up there just to see it because someone
yeah,
said to me that's a really
they
good
call it
place to watch
the
them.
bonsai pipeline because the coral heads under the water are shaped like a fist at the end of an arm.
Oh,
So
really?
when the water pulls out to form the wave, it looks like these fists come up out of it's an illusion. The water over the fist is being sucked away, but it feels like these posts are coming up. And yeah, so it's kind of like bonsai. You're just kind of going for it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really cool, and yeah, if anybody gets the chance to go to Hawaii, it's absolutely worth it. It's beautiful. So how long was you there for before you kind of headed back
Just
to mainland?
just shy of 2 years.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
And what age were you when you joined the military?
So I joined when I left Hawaii, I went back to Omaha for a very short period, for like half the summer. And a couple of my friends were going to join the Marine Corps, and they talked me into joining the Marine Corps. We went into the recruiting station, and I chickened out 'cause I didn't think I could carry a backpack. I was only about 125 pounds. The other guys are too big, strapping guys. So one of them did join the Marine Corps. The other one decided not to join the military at all. I went to the restroom, and on the way, I bumped into the Navy recruiter, and he talked me into joining the Navy.
Right.
And so I signed that paperwork when I was 16 during that short little stint at my mom's house in Omaha before I joined my dad in Detroit.
Okay. Now, did you was you enticed to join the military from your travels across Japan and Hawaii and things like that, or was it something else that like was enticing you?
My dad told me he wasn't going to pay for college, and I didn't know enough about college. And back then, schools weren't very good at explaining how to get into college. I was a 4.0 student, and I'd actually taken a lot more courses than the average high school kid because every time I moved, the new school would say, "Well, we don't really, you didn't get American history. We teach American history. You got world civilization. That's history, but it doesn't count for us." So I was like doubling up
Ah,
core stuff every place I went, all the way through my senior year. Uh, the career counselor my senior year said, according to my transcripts, I had like an entire fifth high school year worth of school just because of all the doubling up I had to do. So I thought I'd be good for college. I wanted to go to college. He said, not paying for it. Sorry. You can do what I did. You can join the Navy. So I thought, okay, if I don't have any choice, I'll join the Navy because the Navy paid for my dad's college. And I said, I'll join the Navy. And one, I'll get out of the situation I'm in, which is I don't really know what I'm going to do next. And two, maybe I'll get the Navy to pay for my schooling.
cool. Okay. You mentioned signing on, and then how long is it, or what's that next step looking like before you actually are going through the doors of training? Because you also mentioned that
Right.
your papers got messed up.
Yeah. So the way that early selection or early sign up program works is anyway up to a full year before you'd actually join physically. I think it was probably at about the 10 months out point. So you basically go down and you actually have to raise your hand and swear an oath and all that stuff. You're in. And then you wait until you turn 17 because you have to be 17 to go into the Navy or any of our
Ah,
military's boot camps. So I went into boot camp right after I turned 17, and our boot camps are 9 weeks long for the Navy. They don't really teach much. It's just discipline and marching, a little bit about Navy history. It's not like, say, the Army or the Marine Corps where you're learning a little bit of basic soldiering skills. So you we stopped issuing rifles at boot camp for the Navy about 3 years earlier. So
okay.
that was missing from my boot camp experience altogether.
And
During
how?
boot camp,
Yeah,
go
go
ahead.
on. Yeah, yeah.
I was just saying during boot camp, and this is something I found out almost 8 years later. I took a test, and the test was, I thought, a swimming test. And we were having a competition, a big sports event that was scored between all the different boot camp companies. And the guy that was the Navy enlisted person in charge of our company wanted to know who could climb ropes fast, who could run fast, who could do things. And there's like 6 or 7 of us that all raised our hands and said we can swim. So since there were so many of us and he had relays and individual stuff, he says, "Well, I'm going to take you to the pool. I'm going to find out if you can swim or not." So we went to the pool, and the pool was just filled with people swimming. It was packed. There's like 70 people there.
Wow.
And he said, "Just wait here for a second." He went over and he talked to someone. And he came back and he said, "You see that guy over there? You do whatever he says. You're going to get in the pool, but you're not going to be allowed to leave until he says you can leave." All right. So I jumped in the pool when the guy said to. I swam as far as the guy told me to swim. And then he told me to go over here and do pull ups and go over here and do push ups. And then he took me into the locker room. And by that time, the 75 people were down to about 15. And he told us to put our pants and our boots back on, our t shirts, and then meet him outside. So we go out and it's already dark now. And he told us we had to run around this huge marching drill area 1.5 times. And we had to run as fast as we could, or there'd be hell to pay. And again, we're all just obedient, right? Okay. And so we ran it. And what I didn't realize at the time is I was actually taking the SEAL entry test.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I got on that swim relay team because he did see that I could swim. And I left there and I went to the Air Traffic Control Radar School for about 16 weeks. I graduated number one in my class and I got promoted, and I also got pickup orders. So they lay out all the ships that are available and you get to pick which one you want to go to. So I picked the USS Albany, which was home ported in Italy, because I wanted to see the Mediterranean, the history of it, and everything. And I happily went to pick up my orders and my tickets, and the guy read out my orders, and he said, report no later than 07:30 tomorrow morning to Underwater Demolition SEAL Training, Coronado, California. And then he yelled at me because I was still standing there, and there were 15 people behind me trying to get their orders and tickets. And yeah,
And you're a bit like, what the hell? I meant to be going to Italy, right?
right. And I at the time I had a girlfriend back in Detroit, and I was going to take 2 weeks of leave in Detroit before I went to Italy, and I didn't know what UDT SEAL training stood for. Back then it was a very, very secret organization. There wasn't any books or movies or anything about it. So why am I going to California? I never heard of Coronado, California. I didn't realize it was in San Diego, but I had never heard. So everything he said, I'm like, what are you
Yeah, yeah,
talking about?
yeah, yeah.
So I
So,
get to the
sorry,
airport and I call my dad.
before you talk about
Yeah,
that, your Navy training, you mentioned it was 9 weeks long, right?
the boot camp. Yeah.
Of boot camp. How did you find that? Now yeah, you went and did this extra training, but I'm guessing that wasn't like week one. You surely did that a little bit later.
Which one? The
The SEAL like
Oh
entry.
yeah, yeah. So the progression would be 9 weeks of boot camp, 16 weeks of air traffic control and radar school.
Yeah.
Then I went to SEAL training, which is 6 months long.
Okay. So, but you that running around, that going, that the 75 of you in the pool. When was that? That wasn't at the beginning, was it?
That was in boot camp in the very beginning.
That at the beginning of boot camp.
Right.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So
Yeah.
did
So
you
I had no memory of it. I had no
yeah, so
idea.
to you it's just part of boot camp.
Right. I just did what I
Yeah,
was told. And I
yeah, yeah,
guess
yeah.
because at the end of the run, they told us to put our names and our social security numbers and stuff down on clipboards. And two of us were asked to do that. So two out of the however many, 13, 14 that did the run. And then they said, go back to your company.
Okay.
And quite frankly, until almost 8.5 years later, when I went back and I was a senior enlisted and I was actually in charge of the first phase of SEAL training, which has Hell Week and the entries. I got to see my record, and then
Right.
I saw that test form. I saw what my
Yeah.
times were. I passed the run by 2 seconds. That's
Okay.
that's a that's a pretty skinny margin to define your fate.
Yeah, 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 yeah. How did you find the rest of boot camp though? Because the first time you're being trained to be a military person in the Navy. How did
Yeah,
you find it?
it was fine. The biggest discrepancy between my life to up to that point, because I'd been to a lot of places, so I wasn't uncomfortable with strangers for sure. I was very easy. It was very easy for me to make acquaintances, and I was very comfortable communicating and talking to people and asking lots of questions. But it was the age discrepancy. So I was 17, and at that time, a really big part of boot camp population was in their late 20s, early 30s.
Right.
So yeah, so it was. I don't know why. I don't know if it had something to do with in the economy in the mid 70s or whatever. But there were lots and lots of older people, and there were a lot of people from different parts of the country I'd never been to. And back then, the culture hadn't been homogenized either nationally or like it is now globally. So there were distinct accents. I mean, if you were from Louisiana, you had a distinct accent from somebody who was from Mississippi, even though it was real close. Floridians had a different accent. Everybody had a different accent, and they had different slang and different, they called everything different things. The guys from Boston called soft drinks tonic, and out west we called it Coke, and someplace else they call it something else. So it was really weird. That was the hardest, and that's the hardest, but the strangest part was trying to figure out how to assimilate with maybe 15 different kinds of cultural backgrounds, and they were all having the same trouble. So you end up kind of clicking together with people that are kind of like you at first.
Okay. Yeah.
But then the military experience is all about you got to do things together. You got to go through the firefighting school and boot camp. There's a lot of things you're doing that you realize it doesn't matter what your differences are. You're
Yeah.
all in this together, kind of thing.
And you mentioned that you were doing a lot of sport when you were growing up,
Yeah.
and therefore you're probably that helped you in boot camp. But how did you find things like the shooting aspect or that kind of drill or that
So there
similar
wasn't.
area?
We didn't have any shooting.
No shooting.
No. Remember, the rifles were taken out 3 years before I got there.
Oh, okay. I
So the
thought
Na-
that was just
yeah,
for like
yeah.
the
So the
general
Navy, no,
purpose.
the Navy. We had the rifle racks in the back of the barracks room still, but 3 years earlier they'd removed it. The
Wow.
Navy decided that sailors didn't need to know how to shoot. They changed their opinion after USS Cole got hit in 2000. So now sailors know how to shoot. Um,
Okay.
but you know the they picked recruits to be leaders, and same thing as when I went through officers candidate school. They picked the students to be leaders. So you're supposed to kind of lead and learn about leadership by leading this little, you know, odd little structure that they have in boot camp. So there's a company commander who's a recruit, and there's an assistant company commander. So I was picked to be the assistant company commander, and then there's a company, there's squads, and each squad has a leader and all that. And that was really weird because I'd never been in charge of anything. Suddenly I've got 90 guys that I'm tell them to show up here, show up there, make sure you have this equipment. Um, that was probably of all the things I remember about boot camp, that was probably the biggest challenge and something I'd never anticipated.
Mm.
My first stint at trying to become a leader and to be judged as a leader and to have people engage with me and
Yeah.
basically tell me to pound sand because they're not gonna listen to a 17-year-old punk regardless of what his title is.
Yeah. But you got through that. Then you headed off, and there was a 16-week course for what in particular?
Well, it's called Operations Specialist, but it covers air traffic control, meaning bringing in helicopters into the back of Navy ships, and radar operations, which is everything to do with surface radar, that's ships, and everything to do with air radar, which is all the planes, aircraft. You learn both aspects of it. You learn how to work in a combat information center where all that information is being exchanged. Um, Back then, it was we were transitioning from an analog approach, which same kind of radar repeaters my dad used, with little hand cranks and stuff, and you're moving little analog dials to 365, meters and or miles or whatever the measurement happened to be, x number of degrees, and these two little lines would come across the thing as you're looking at, and it was very very intense, and and then with us, what they did is they got us through the original 12-week course, and they added another 4 weeks because the Navy was converting to computers, all computers, to do what we just got trained to do, like the guys did in the Korean War. And they had trackballs, first, I mean, just way, way, way before, games, where you had a
Right.
ball, and if you had your hand on it, you're moving the ball around, and it's moving the little cursor all over the screen, and then when you put it on what you want it, you hit it like that with your hand, and this little ring pops up, and it locks it in. All this data shows up. Yeah, back then. So it was like Star Wars stuff for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you enjoy it though? I mean, that's 4 months, right? So it's quite a long time to be learning things.
So we had the night school session. They were hurting for this particular skill set in the Navy. So we started at, I think it was 8 o'clock in the evening and finished sometime around 2 o'clock in the morning, and did that for the whole 16 weeks. That took a while to get used to. It's the first time I ever drank coffee in my life,
Oh
and
well.
I haven't stopped yet. The uh, the the challenge of it, looking back, kind of like SEAL, like Hellwick or something. Looking back on it, it seems really cool and everything. While you're going through it, you just wish it would stop, because we started with about 28 students, and I think we ended up with about half that number, and most of them
Wow.
couldn't handle, like, the air traffic. Just think of what an air traffic controller does, and they've got to keep all these
Yeah.
different elements in their mind sorted and ordered, and give directions and not screw it up, not even a
Yeah.
little bit, not even once.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, if the little dots on the screen start to come together and merging, you got a problem. So yeah, there's no room for failure, and you're doing it in a combat information center, and all the things you're doing are being displayed openly, so the instructors can see. You can't cheat, you can't do a workaround, you can't catch up. Yeah, so it's pretty intense.
Do you happen to know if that is nowadays what the role is called, or if they or
Yep.
if they amalgamated it with someone else?
No, it's still the same. They moved
Yeah.
the school from Illinois to not too far from where I live right now, to Virginia. But it's the same thing. Operations specialist. I'm sure the technology has improved, but it's the same
Mm.
type of operations.
Yeah. Nice. Nice. And then you mentioned about going to get your papers because you thought you were off to Italy, but you went somewhere
Yeah,
else. So tell us about that aspect.
yeah. So after the shock of getting the information from this guy, and I tried to ask a question, he just told me to get the hell out of there, and I was going to miss my plane because there was a snowstorm hitting, and the shuttle to the airport in Chicago was going to be ending soon. So I did what I was told. I get to the airport. I didn't have enough quarters to call my dad, so I borrowed some quarters from some people, which it was nice because I was in uniform, so they gave me quarters. I
And
called my
sorry,
dad.
just to
Yeah,
jump in there for anybody that's too young, you had to pay for calls back then. You didn't
yeah,
have cell phones or mobiles.
yeah. And the longer the distance of the call, the more expensive it was.
uh,
You could
yeah.
call and ask somebody to accept the charges, but you weren't the one talking.
Oh
The,
yeah.
the operator would call your family and say, "We have a call. Would would you accept the charges?" And 9 times out of 10, they go, "Oh, no way!" Click. So they weren't hearing your voice, and they didn't necessarily say much about you. So it was lucky if you ever got anybody to actually accept charges, unless you somehow figured it out ahead of time in a letter or something. I'm going to call you
Yeah.
exactly at this time. Anyway, so I got the quarters on the machine, and I probably had about 4 minutes of time. My dad thankfully answered, because that was the problem in those days. Phones were attached to buildings, not to your hip or in your pocket. And I blurted out everything that happened, and he paused and he said, "I don't know what this is in the Navy that you're talking about, but I do know that orders are orders, and you got to follow your orders. So when you get on the plane, go out to California, And when you get there, find a chief petty officer, walk up to him and explain what the situation is, and they'll sort it all out. And he goes, because the chiefs run the Navy. And I go, all right. And that's what I did. I showed up out there, and I was on a Friday night, so I had to wait until Monday morning. And meanwhile, I found out what a UDT was. It was underwater demolition team, essentially a frogman. And I learned about what a SEAL was, all because the barracks, the holding barracks that I was sitting in for that weekend, was filling up with guys that wanted to be SEALs, that had been training to be SEALs, and were happy to tell me everything about the SEALs. And so the
Okay.
more they talked, the more I realized, yeah, this is a big mistake, because remember, I didn't join the Marine Corps because I didn't think I could carry a backpack.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went in Monday morning and I did exactly what he said. I went to the reception area at the school and said I need to talk to a chief petty officer. And the student that was standing there said, "Well, why? Who are you? Are you checking in?" I said, "Nope, I need to talk." I just kept saying it. And so a master chief, which is the highest rank you can get in the Navy, he comes in there and he said, "So you're looking for a chief?" And I said, "Yes, Master Chief." He goes, "So will Master Chief do?" I said, "Absolutely, Master Chief." He goes, "Come on." Takes me back to this room, listens to my story. And when I'm done, he says, "I believe you. We're not allowed to recruit operations specialists. They're considered a restricted job in the Navy. So there's no way we could have ever asked you to come here. There's no way you could have volunteered to come here after you were qualified to be an OS. But now that you're here," and then he talked me into it.
He talked you into it.
And the nice thing was he was about 5'4", a chest full of medals. Um, I'm in contact with him to this day. We reconnected on Facebook about 3 years ago. And I told him the story. I wrote it out for him and told him, because he didn't, of course, he's not going to remember this. And I know he isn't going to remember this because flashing forward 8 years or so, when I show up and I'm the guy in charge of first phase, about once or twice a week, somebody would come down and say, "Hey, we have a guy up there saying there's a mistake of orders."
Okay.
And most of the times it's just cold feet, but, I'm thinking, man, I can't believe this guy gave me the time of day because it happens all the time, but he did. And that's how I ended up in the SEALs.
Do you remember what he said to you that actually so-called convinced you to stay?
And the parts I can remember, he he asked me if I played sports, and I said yes. And he said, "What did you play?" And I told him. And he said, "So when you were in football, did the coaches yell?" I said, "Well, yeah." "Why did they yell at you?" "Well, if we weren't running fast enough or doing the play the right way." And he goes, "Well, the instructors here are a lot like that. They're just trying to make you better. They're just trying to get everybody to work together. They want you to win. They might seem harsh, but like the coaches in your football team, they just want to see everybody do better." Then I said, "Okay." He goes, "Are you comfortable around water?" And I said, "Well, yeah." "Do you know how to swim?" So I told him, "Yeah, I was a competitive AAU swimmer, blah, blah, blah." And he goes, "Really?" And he goes, "Have you been near the ocean?" "Yeah, I surfed in Hawaii." And all. He goes, "Really? Okay, so you'll have no problem here." And eventually he made it sound like it was a country club sports association. And then if anybody yelled at me, it's because they really wanted me to be an Olympian.
Oh, brilliant.
And again, remember, this time I'm just turning 18. Like, I'm still kind of obeying, what people tell
Yeah.
me to do. And for a master chief to say, "Yeah, no sweat," then it's a volunteer organization. You can volunteer out of the SEAL course anytime. You can volunteer out of any SEAL training, intermediate training at any time. You can be in the teams for 10 years and say, "I'm done." There's no coercion. You can quit any moment. And I said, "Okay." He goes, "You know what? And if you do decide this isn't for you and you want to move along, you're an OS and they're going to put you on that ship anyway." I go, "All
Okay.
right."
So you mentioned just say the name again, because I mean I don't know everything about the SEALs. As far as I'm aware, you go on buds. Is that
Yeah. So,
is that what it is
so
now, and it used to be called different, or
no, it's always been that. It stands for Basic Underwater Demolition, and then there's a slash, and then S for SEAL training.
right? Okay, and that's
Yeah,
what you were there to do. Is that right?
that's what I ended up, entering there for a
Okay,
six
but
month camp.
you called it something different though, didn't you?
Well, they said underwater demolition slash SEAL training on my orders, but the school is
Right.
called Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training.
Roger.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
or buds for short.
Buds for sure. So 6 months there. What can you share? What can you remember? Just in case others are thinking of going down the SEAL route themselves.
Yeah. So I remember more because I came back as an instructor. I think when you're going through it, you're not really paying attention to the history of it. You're not really contemplating that you're going to think about this later on down the road, and you have to reflect back on it. You're getting up, surviving, one evolution at a time, one event at a time, one test at a time, and then you're trying to make it to sleep, and then you're trying to wake up and do it all over again. So you string together a whole lot of days like that. And I guess the first thing I realized was we started out with 126 guys on day one, and by the time Hell Week started, which was about 3 or 4 weeks, 3 weeks later, I think in my time, 4 weeks later, they changed it off and on. So I had 4 weeks of what they called um, preparatory training or pre-training, and then Hell Week started, and that was a whole week, the fifth week in my time. So in that 4 weeks, we lost half the class. So we were down to 60 people. And that was an interesting experience because I'd never been exposed to anything like that. The attrition, the human attrition. It must have been what it was like for people like hitting the beaches in World War II with all their buddies that they trained with. On day three, you're looking around and half of them are gone. You have no idea what happened to them. You don't know where they, you have no clue. And that's what it was like. Every single day, my room emptied out. There was 4 people to a room. Every day it emptied out. Every week they'd reorder the rooms and everything. You get some new room buddies, and then another week would go by and it'd empty out. And you start getting this weird feeling like, why am I still here? Why am I surviving? Where are these people going? Because they don't let you talk to them. If they
Right.
quit
Okay.
or they're injured, they were actually taken to another Navy base to get away from the environment, and so they can kind of rebuild their self-esteem and get ready for whatever the Navy was going to have them do in the future. So that was really a weird thing for a guy my age to see that. The other thing I realized is that when things get difficult and things go sideways in life, there are people that suck it up and smile, and there are people that get buried by the event and get depressed and turn to despair. And you can physically see the difference. You can see it in their eyes. You can see it in their posture. Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, about his experience in a Nazi prison camp, writes about exactly the same thing I saw at Buds, and people just gave up on themselves. And pretty soon they turn inward. They wouldn't talk to anybody, and you knew after the third week, you knew if that guy doing that is not going to stick around. He's going to be gone. As an
Mhm.
instructor later on, you definitely saw that. You could actually see if you see a twinkle in somebody's eyes when they're shivering, that dude's sticking around, right?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But if you saw somebody looking at you very dully and he's just going into a class about navigation, then he's already made a decision to leave. So it became
Okay.
a mental game. I don't think I appreciated it until I was an instructor, but the struggle was all between your ears. It was all not about how tough you were physically or how good you were physically or how athletic you were physically or even how you could endure, environmental challenges. It was, what did you do with all that psychologically, intellectually? How did you decide to deal with it? And if you decided to deal with it by putting one foot in front of the other and hanging around those guys that were smiling, you had a chance.
Okay.
And that's what I learned more than anything else from that experience.
All right. Now you mentioned Hell Week. Is this something that's open to the public? Are we allowed to know what is in Hell Week? Because I'm guessing that's
Yeah,
one of the testing weeks. That's my guess that gets rid of people that
yeah,
aren't going to cut it.
yeah. Also known affectionately as Boats and Logs Week. You basically, like the SAS, they'd make you, carry massive backpacks across the moors and do, every selection process, Army Rangers, Green Berets, Australian and British SAS, everybody, SBS, they all have something, right? So what the SEALs decided, and this is back in World War II, was one of the things that they hated to do was carrying small boats all over the place because they're cumbersome and they're difficult to maneuver. And so from the very beginning, they decided to take these little dinghies and make them a part of the the stress factor. So in Hell Week, you've already been trained how to inflate these things, deflate these things, paddle them through the surf, flip them over to drain them of water, flip them back over, get back in. You've been trained on how to land on rocks and pull them up off the rocks safely, and all that, and your physical training and your swimming and your ability to run long distances all comes to play in 5 days of pretty much 95% being awake. So you're sleep deprived for the whole period. You get to eat all you want, by the way. If you didn't do that, then they would just flop over on the third day. But you're
Yeah.
in a constant state of motion. So you are either walking, running, swimming, carrying a boat on your head, or carrying a log someplace from point A to point B nonstop for 5 days. It's not about, and you're doing it at night, you're doing it whatever the weather conditions are, and you're immersed in the ocean a lot. So you're losing body heat, you're burning calories like crazy. And the whole point of the exercise is to let that process in that environment get you to a point where you make that final decision in your head. That's it. If you win the fight with the voices in your head, and usually it's by Tuesday night or Wednesday morning of Hell Week, you're never going to quit again. That's because you will have come to a point where you realize I'm not capable of quitting, and I can pretty much handle anything. And at that point, we finish out the last 2 days of Hell Week, but it's very, very choreographed, and people are watching everything because your ability to make good decisions is rapidly declining because of your fatigue and your mental state. And so you're still shuffling and staying in sync with the events and all that, but you can actually do physical damage if you just kept pushing them the last 2 days just to push them, because we all know, because we've all been there, they pretty much have decided. I don't think in the time I was there as an instructor, I don't think I ever saw anybody quit after the sun came up on Wednesday morning.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned that you were there for 6 months, but this Hell Week is only after the first month. So what's
Yeah.
the final months looking like?
So it's changed over time. And when I went through, you had beach reconnaissance and offshore reconnaissance in preparation for landing. So basically swimming around off the beach, looking for obstacles to landing craft and things. The old World War II mission of the original Frogmen. That's what you trained to after Hell Week. And then you went into the next phase, which when I went through was the diving phase. So you go through basic air scuba. There's a couple of really tough tests in there that there is attrition. It's not because people quit, it's because people freak out under the stress of doing things underwater. And every class loses two or three at the most in those series of tests. It's called pool competency, but it's because we know down the road you're going to be, in a dark, peat-filled harbor someplace in Europe, trying to find the bottom of a ship, and you're going to have guys next to you and guns hanging off you and everything, and you can get entangled and you can panic. At any moment you can panic, and most of the time you will get confused and entangled, and you got to stop and think through the entire thing and slowly undo the knot, be patient, and be poised. So what they do in that pool, in that nice clean pool in the California sun, is nothing compared to what is going to happen. So that's what you do in the early part. Once you get your scuba quals, then they start shifting into more advanced underwater breathing apparatuses, a pure oxygen apparatus, and then there's a mixed gas apparatus. Those are more introductory um, sessions of training. They teach you how to attack ships, at least on paper. how you use underwater navigation as swim pairs to go and find a ship and then place a charge on that ship and then get away from that ship through underwater navigation. And, uh, and then you're done with that phase. Meanwhile, all the running and swimming in the obstacle courses and that's all happening. The physical conditioning still going on through that whole second phase. You're just not being punished like a hell week type thing.
Okay.
And then you go into the last phase, which for me was land warfare, weapons, and demolitions.
And was there a great feeling of relief, or you've accomplished this, or what at the end for yourself once you got through and achieved and became a SEAL?
My biggest relief was when the last four or 5 weeks of the last 9 weeks, we go to an island off the coast of San Diego, San Clemente, and we train with a lot more heavy firepower weapons and demolitions and grenades and all that. And they don't have any long timed runs out there. I was the worst runner in my class.
Right.
I was the fastest sprinter and I was the worst long distance runner. And all we did was long distance running. So if we ever had occasion to go short distances, we had 90 pounds of gear on us. So nobody was moving fast. So I failed the timed run at the end of first phase, and I had 1 week to make it up or get kicked out. I passed, and then every phase the times ratcheted down. So I passed that makeup run in first phase by about 9 seconds, but I had to carve 15 seconds off to make the very first timed run in the next phase.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But somehow I passed that run, and there were two 14-mile runs. This is in soft sand with wearing boots. So I survived both of those, and until the day where I didn't have to do a timed run was behind me, I figured somehow I could still end up being kicked out of this place. But once we go to the island, there was no timed runs. There was lots of running with rifles and things like that, but there was nothing timed. So I knew once I got on that plane and those wheels came off the tarmac, there was a 99.9% chance I was going to be a SEAL. So that's really
Nice.
when I felt it. Not even after Hell
Good.
Week. I mean, I figured that was just one notch in the belt. That wasn't it. That
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah. Yeah.
enough yet.
So once you complete the buds, do you know where you're going, or do you all go to a central location and then you go from there? What can you share from that area?
Sure. So in those days, you went to Army Jump School at Fort Benning, same jump school that the Army went through.
Right.
Learned how to jump out of a plane. You got 5 jumps to get qualified, and you did a couple of day jumps, and then a day jump with full equipment, and then a night jump, and then a night jump with full equipment. And I want to say it was 3 weeks long. Yeah, it was 3 weeks long. But when you left Buds, when you graduated, they had handed you your orders, so you knew where you were going. And in
They
those days,
had, did you say?
yeah. So in
Yeah.
those days,
Okay.
they only had two SEAL teams. They had SEAL Team One in California and SEAL Team Two in Virginia Beach. And then they had a couple of underwater demolition teams that were doing the old World War II mission as their primary focus. SEAL Teams One and Two were jungle fighting. They were Vietnam era, focused kind of jungle fighters. A couple classes, I think a couple classes before me was the first time they started sending guys straight from Buds right to a SEAL team. It used to be you had to go to a UDT team, do 2 years, and then request to go to the SEAL team and all this other stuff. But they were running out of fresh bodies in both the SEAL teams, and the guys had been pretty shot up in 10 years of wartime, so they needed to get some fresh blood in there. So I went to jump school, 3 weeks of learning how to jump out of an airplane. Then I
How
reported to
was that
SEAL. That
for
wasn't
you?
bad. First time I ever saw an adult cry from fear. That was interesting. That's a chain reaction. You get a whole bunch of people lined up to a side exit and a cargo plane, and even if it's daytime outside, you can't see anything because there's so many people. I'm 5'9". If everybody lined up in front of you, waiting to go out with their helmets on and everything, and then you start hearing people crying. I'm like, wow, there's some people really worried about this. And I wasn't worried until I heard somebody start crying. It's kind of like the anybody that's ever been in an aircraft in the military knows the effect of one guy puking. It's
Yeah.
like it just starts a chain reaction, Um, and that's how it was. Everybody starts freaking out, and I'm like, why is everybody scared? These were grown men. They're all older than me, right? And then all of a sudden you're moving, and then you start to see a little bit of light, and then you turn. It's like you're stuck down to the plane. It's over, and you're under the canopy, and you're like, oh, okay, this is so bad. So yeah, the problem with that. I mean, I went on to have God at least 250 static line jumps, where you have a line pulling the parachute for you, and about 750 skydives. So
Wow.
I really liked jumping. I enjoyed it. But yeah, so got orders. You went to your first command. Probably a third of our class went to SEAL Team 1 or SEAL Team 2, and the others went to UDT teams. In 1983, they converted all of them to SEAL teams.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
So sorry, say again where you went to?
SEAL Team
SEAL
2
team
in Virginia
SEAL Team
Beach.
2,
Yeah.
Virginia Beach. Okay. Um, and how was it there? Because I'm guessing it's different, right? It's different from a boot camp. It's different from buds. It's different because it's an actual unit. How was it when you got
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. So, you didn't have that much positional authority or self-esteem, even after getting through buds, because everybody there, all the instructors told you you're nothing, you're not a SEAL yet and all that. But when you showed up at a SEAL team, you were, a fucking new guy, an FNG. I mean, that was
Yeah.
the label. One guy told me you were fully qualified and only qualified to empty the trash can or the shit cans, what they call it. And that's what we're going to have you do for a while. I mean, that was it. They were all, I mean, we had maybe 16 or 17 guys that weren't Vietnam vets. We
Right.
had we had Navy Cross. I mean, everybody was all heavily decorated warriors, all shot up, body parts, chunks of body parts missing. Very humbling because I knew enough about history to understand what that all meant. But they were a different generation, and they were older than me by, in most cases, about 10 years, and some cases even older than that. So there was a generational disconnect, and they were all heavy drinkers and heavy smokers, and it was a whole different kind of world, a whole different kind of culture for somebody stepping in there. Not just for me, but for any of us new guys that were walking in there.
Okay.
So we wanted to assimilate, and assimilation isn't a social thing in that kind of a unit. So you go through a 4-month intermediary course. They still have it. It's just right after Buds, and it's in Coronado, but it's been there ever since I went through. Different names, et cetera, but the same thing. They basically train you in the intermediate skills of warfare, because when you came out of Buds, you really didn't know that much. And the way that it was run at the time for SEAL Team 1 and SEAL Team 2 is you basically were running through the Vietnam pre-deployment training. Even though
Okay.
Vietnam was over, you were considered the Navy's jungle fighting unit, special ops jungle fighting unit. So you had to keep those skills up. So we were trained by all these, 8, 9 tour combat veteran SEAL superstars in how to fight the VC or how to fight communist guerrillas and how to do ambushes and how to sneak around. And it was all very non-kinetic. You were supposed to move like a ninja, do the job, and get out without anybody knowing you were there. But like a ninja, if somebody suddenly woke up and saw you, you had about 19 different ways to kill the person, and you were trained to kill the person violently, quickly, and end it, so there wasn't a real fight. It was
Yeah.
more like murder. You did it, and you slid back out. And that was the philosophy. It was definitely not today's, kick the door down, blow things up, slide down ropes on top of buildings and all that. It was very, very cerebral and very philosophically different, because the best thing for a SEAL in Vietnam was to say that they were on missions and they never got caught.
Hmm.
The worst things for most of the SEALs in Vietnam, a lot of the guys that trained us, they point to their awards and say, this is indication of a fuck up. If I've got a valor award and I'm a SEAL, it means I fucked up. My team fucked up. We got caught.
Right.
We stumbled into something we shouldn't have stumbled into. We didn't break contact fast enough. So if you see guys walking around with these on there, they know the stories, and the stories aren't good stories. 99% of the stories are we screwed things up. So, again, kind of a flip, a reversal of the more valorous approach, say, by light infantry and elite infantry, which is, you're sent in there to, smack heads and cause chaos and defeat the enemy and all that. And getting shot and getting shot at is a part of the deal.
Mm.
They didn't see it that way.
Okay. Okay. Now, just for timeline, kind of, yeah, knowing where you are, what age are you at the point of you going to SEAL Team 2, and roughly what year is that you get there?
Early 77, like January 77, and I'm 18 and a half.
Okay. So still very young. Still very
Yeah,
young.
I think I broke 130 pounds soaking wet right about the time I showed up at SEAL Team 2.
And then how long was you there at SEAL Team 2? Because you mentioned about going back as a training
Yeah,
instructor, but was you at SEAL Team 2 for that whole time before you went back, or
yeah,
did
I
you?
was there for 8 years
Okay.
and
Yeah.
made I think 5 deployments overseas. They're usually 6-month deployments, working with our allied counterparts. So special operators, and I spent a lot of time in pool. I spent
Which
a
is
lot of time in England in general, uh, working with the Danish commandos, the Norwegian commandos, the German commandos, the French Commando Hubert, the Italians, the Spanish. You name it. We worked with everybody, and you'd go and you'd work for a month usually in each country. And SEAL Team Two's orientation at that time was northern, kind of the NATO environment. Um, so yeah, at the end of that 8-year period, I made chief and I showed up for a 2-year tour as an instructor back in California at the schoolhouse to be the senior enlisted guy in charge of that first phase of BUDS training.
interesting. Interesting. Now, during that 8 year before you head off back to Buds, are you able to share anything in particular that stood out, like a mission, not in real detail, but just an overview of something that you've done that stood out?
There was a lot of Cold War type of activity that was going on that that I can't really talk about, but it was think about that philosophy I was talking about before. SEALs they were always on standby for a hot war, but they were being used all over the place for strategic reconnaissance, strategic surveillance. Um, I mean, everybody was. All of our counterparts in NATO were doing the same thing. We were being trained in skills that had nothing to do with guns, so that we could, we were going to lock picking schools, all kinds of crazy stuff, so that we could go out and do what we had to do in a non-hot firing war. And there were a couple times we got stood up for kind of a shoot 'em up, but none of them ever came to fruition. The very last one was Grenada. It was just before I left. And we were all ready to go down there and everything, but the Grenadians and the Cubans gave up faster than we could get down there. So the the big wave of SEALs didn't get engaged. So that's it in a
Okay.
nutshell.
And how does promotion work in the SEAL team? Is it after a period of time, or do you have to go off and do certain courses, or have completed a certain amount of things before you get looked at?
Yeah, so it's pretty much the same as it was when I first joined. You are put into what they call a rate in the Navy. It's a military operational occupational specialty in the Army, MOS, and it's what you are. So I was a radar operator, right? I was a OS operations specialist. So for me to promote, I had two things. One, I had to do a minimum time service, and then I had to take a test. And the test was my peer group. So everybody taking that ranked test in the entire United States Navy was competing. And every year, the number of openings for that rank fluctuated. So if there's a year where they only had a need for two, the top two people testing out would get it, and everybody else would just, have to wait. And the SEALs didn't operate and work in the rates that the Navy had. I never operated, radar trying to land a helicopter when I was at SEAL Team 2.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff that was related to my specialty was all classified, and we weren't allowed to hold that particular stuff. I'd have to go to a ship, go into a safe or a big, contained room and study in there if I wanted to prepare for the test, which is pretty difficult since I'm on the road running around learning how to do other things.
Yeah.
There were there were a couple of jobs SEALs had, like being a medic, that were aligned. There were some jobs that were close enough, like mechanically related, or communications related jobs, because we were using all kinds of radios and stuff, so we were communicating all the time. But just because you were a communicator in SEAL teams doesn't mean it aligned with what your official Navy job was. Your official Navy job might have been cook, but now you're an advanced communication specialist in a SEAL platoon. So what we all did to cope with that is we all try to figure out what's the simplest possible test we can pass that the Navy has, where we don't have to be on a ship actually practicing it. Because it was unfair that we had to compete because it didn't make any sense. So gunner's mate, which had a lot to do with just guns, and the uh, the second one was bosun's mate. So
Was what?
basically,
Sorry.
bosun's mate. So basically, how do you paint a ship? How do you prep, prime, and paint a
Ah,
ship? How do you coil ropes and lines, and how do you handle anchors and that kind of stuff? So it's very learnable, and once you've learned it, it's not like you need to learn. They're not going to change the anchor system every year like they do with the technology part. So I was lucky enough. I took the first rank test at SEAL Team 2 as an OS. I actually took about 15 minutes. I had 4 hours to take the test. I hadn't trained, prepared for it. I went in there and kind of went ABBCC, ABBCC until I was done. I walked out. And about 3 months later, somebody said, "Hey, congratulations, Strong." I go, "What?" He goes, "Your name's up on the list. You made second class petty officer." I said, "No way. Fucking way." I went down there. Well, that was the year the Navy had a huge gap in that particular rank in OS. And so all you had to do is show up and fog a mirror and you're in. It's not. I'm like, that's great. But then I started to approach the next test a couple years later, and I thought, there's just no way in hell I'm going to be able to do this. So I officially did all the paperwork to change from an OS to a bosun's mate, and I studied the bosun's mate test. I went in there and I spent all of the 4 hours, and and I passed and I got promoted. And then a couple years later, I'd do the same thing when I made chief, and um, and I passed that test. So nowadays, I guess back in about 2005-ish, the SEAL community did away with that and created a special operations rank structure. So
okay.
you test for the different ranks as a SEAL, which is which is a lot much more fair, I think.
Yeah,
It's for a
massively.
lot of reasons because you got extra points in the test system. So if you were a SEAL, you're getting awards all the time, and those awards counted. So you're up against these guys in the fleet that might go 10 years before they get some kind of personal award, and you're walking around with 9 of them. So yeah, that was unfair. I mean, it was the only thing that was a counterbalance on our side, but still, that was unfair that we were beating guys that didn't have the same opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, in your 8 years, did you get any awards in those first 8 years? Did you get any
Oh
awards
yeah,
for your missions
yeah,
and jobs away?
yeah, I did.
You allowed to share any of those or not?
Well, they weren't like a Medal of Honor or anything. It was just Navy commendations and Navy achievement medals, and you get medals and awards when you are involved in big exercises or you go on major deployments and things like that. So I think I probably had like three in the Navy. It's 3 awards per row. I think I had like 9 total, 9 or 10 maybe.
In the eight
When I
years?
Yeah, when I left there.
Wow.
Again, remember the opportunity. You're high visibility, and much more so when I was an officer, just because the tempo of real world missions really kicked up. But you know, I I briefed the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Secretary of Defense. I mean, when you get that kind of level of play, and you go and you do something that's successful, they just throw a bunch of crap at that whole group, and yeah,
Yeah, it's so very different to the British military. we I mean, I was in for 16 years and I got 5 medals, but only what, two of them were operational related. So it's so very different than the US military against the British. Now, talking of British, you did mention about being down here in Poole. That's the south coast of the UK. That's the home of our SBS. So, what's it like working with your British counterparts? Don't really care about the other European countries or about the British counterparts.
It was great. It was great. And every weekend we'd all go to Bournemouth, and that was
Oh
great too.
yeah.
Yeah. And all the girls from Manchester would come down to Bournemouth, and it was a lot of fun. The whole thing was a lot of fun. Well, the SBS guys are really good. And they trained with the same counterparts we did. I mean, they've just come back from, say, doing a 1 month ski thing with the Norwegians, and we were going up there next. And they were working with the Dutch and we just worked with the Dutch, so it was a lot of cross pollination. We obviously have a lot in common in a lot of ways culturally. The SBS has a tradition going back to, I think it's 1970, of sending one officer and one color sergeant to SEAL Team 2 as an exchange program for 2 years. And we, in turn, would send one officer and one enlisted to Poole.
Okay.
And that continued on. I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but the whole time I was at SEAL Team 2 for the 8 years, there was a constant rotation. And then eventually, like when I became a young officer, um, I was running into guys that I knew from those exchanges. One of the times in Gibraltar as an officer, the guy in charge of all the SBS guys was an enlisted guy. When we were both enlisted guys, and we both realized we were both in charge of this exercise. We're like, they put the loonies in charge of the asylum here. Um, and then that's how I got to do the whole Guinness, the whole Guinness drinking march down in Gibraltar to the gate to see if I could get my name up on the plaque there, but I didn't make it. Do you know about
Oh,
that?
can no, I've been to Gibraltar, but
Yeah.
go on,
It's kind
share
of
with
like
that.
a pub crawl. You start, there's like the three main roads that are long enough. This is on the western face. And there's the enlisted club and the officers club at the end, closer to the base going into Spain. And in there's plaques up on the walls. And this is telling. In the officers club, there's one plaque. And in the enlisted club, there's like 7 plaques. And the names are all the guys that made this event, that actually went and had the last pint in the club. But you had to have a pint. It's like, I think it's like 10 bars, and you have to have witnesses and everything, and you have to drink 1 pint. And you can do Murphy's too. So it was Murphy's or
Okay.
Guinness. You do 1 pint in every bar, and then the last one has to be in the enlisted mess or the officers mess, and then the witnesses sign a thing, and then your name gets on the plaque forever.
Nice. And
And
you did that.
now I got to about the 6th bar.
Oh, okay,
That was it.
okay.
I mean, just the volume of fluid being put into your body, it's just. But I did become a fan of Guinness and Murphy's Irish Stout. I still drink both of them. So
Yeah, they're
yeah,
very thick, aren't they? It's like having a
yeah.
meal.
And then I got to run the tunnels of Gibraltar. There's all kinds of crazy stuff. Yeah, with
Yeah.
with the
No, it's
SBS.
cool. With the SBS, yeah?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I was in Gibraltar. Not, I wasn't there with the military in the sense of doing tasks or anything. But I did when I was in. I was a scuba diving instructor. So I took a team out. Well, I didn't take them out. I was part of a team that went out, and we were running lots of different dives. But at that time, I was training for my army divers course, and so we would use the rock to do some good training.
yeah.
Run up to the top and see the monkeys, and run back down. And the guy I was with, he was in the Royal Marines reserves, I guess you call it, and he was taking me through my paces for sure because he was way fitter than me. Just like you, I wasn't the best on land, but I was great in the water. So yeah, it's a great place to be.
I've got a guy that has worked for me off and on. He's working for another company now, but he still has a bad back from that Gibraltar trip because we alternated with the SBS every morning. Uh, the SBS would take physical training one morning, and then
Eh,
we'd get it the next morning for 3 weeks. And man, It never went the other direction. It never got easier. It was, how do we one up those assholes
Yeah.
tomorrow? And we were doing, I mean, crazy crap. And running up to the top and back was, sometimes just part of it. It was the calisthenics and the, buddy lifts and all kinds of crazy stuff that messed up his back, I guess. Then we had boxing. We were doing boxing between us. It's fun and it's challenging. And then you go out and then you do the day's training, and then you get cleaned up and you go out and drink together.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a lot. It was a great way to have a career.
Yeah. And it's great training for all aspects of the military. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good times, good times. Okay, then you mentioned you moved over as what was the rank? Was it chief?
Yeah.
Chief petty officer?
Right.
Yeah. Over
Yes.
to the school, back to the school. Did you ask for that, or did they recommend, or did they tell?
Well, in those days, you had to get selected to be an instructor. So I think they put out a request for names, and somebody in my command thought I would be. I've been in what we call the training cell off and on throughout the 8 years where I was teaching and training, and then we're not in an active unit. You kind of rotated. You go in for like 6 months, and then come back out and jump into a platoon that was gearing up. So yeah, I was selected, and then I was asked by whoever picked me, would you be willing to go out there? And I said, yeah, sure. So that's how I ended up out there. I didn't put in a request to go
Okay.
to San
Yeah.
Diego. And so I did that for 2 years, went to school at night, finished up my degree because you have to have a degree to become an officer in our Navy. And I was actually up for senior chief, the second to highest rank, when I got accepted to Officers Canada School. So
Right.
I went,
So
I went straight.
whilst you're at the school, how did you find that? Because, like you said, you remember more of it now because you went back to oversee it, essentially, I guess. Or was you heavily
Yeah.
involved with the actual training, or was it more about the planning process? How was it from your side?
Well, it's all choreographed. It's all line diagrammed. It's all planned like a it's planned like a movie. It's every single day is storyboarded out. It's timed out. It's the resources, the safety aspect of it, the medical aspect of it, the communications aspect of it. I didn't realize that. I mean, my very first day walking into the office, I to my horror, they were briefing in great detail for the 14-mile run. I showed up on the day of the 14-mile run. They'd moved it into first phase, I guess, over the ensuing 8 years. And I'm like, oh God, I got to run in the soft sand on a 14-mile run. And I was just terrified. I said, I'm going to look like an idiot. I'm going to end up quitting. You know, Chief Strong's going to fall behind. And then I'm going to get punished, and I'd end up in the goon squad with all the other guys that fell behind. But what I learned was that even when I was a student, there were these complicated machinations to make everything choreographed and to set up the psychology of every event. And then they were briefed just like a complicated special ops mission. So, I mean, I went up to one of the guys and I said, what's going on? He says, the 14-mile run. And I said, oh, why is it so? I mean, because in my memory, 14-mile run was they said, hey, you're going to have class at 9 o'clock. And then you're in the classroom and some guy walks in and says, hey, fuck that. Let's go on the beach. And then he took us on a 14-mile run. That's how it happened. Right. But yeah, it was all choreographed.
Yeah.
And I'm going, yeah, I mean, this is so planned out. So I was like in Disney World, but I got to see behind the scenes how all the puppets are moving and all the. So that was impressive and eye opening. And then I told one of the guys, I said, yeah, I'm a little worried I'm going to be able to keep up with this. He goes, oh, we don't have to run the whole damn thing. He says, you'll
Yeah.
be an outrunner, meaning you're going to be on the flanks, and we all rotate. And if you ever think you got an issue, whatever, you just kind of raise your hand and then, fall back, and then another guy will jump out of the truck and take your place. And then we know exactly where every single place is that they're going to circle. And so we can take breaks and all that. And, uh, and there's places where they're going to accelerate the pace to stretch the class out. Then they're going to cut off the guys that are having a hard time. They're going to punish them. And it was all laid out on this big board. And I'm thinking, I've lived that. I had no idea it was organized. I had no idea. So that was my first day.
I bet. Yeah, it's
Um,
great. I
yeah, the first,
just on that, sorry. So I went back during my time. I went back to our. So I was an engineer, Royal engineer, and I went back to our training school. So where they train from being a soldier to being a combat engineer. And at that time, that was when I was training for my Army Divers course. So I wanted to be part of these base or combat engineer training groups where there was a lot of physical training, and I would go out with them. But because you knew what the next step was going to be, you knew, like you said, where they were doing the circles, where they were going to accelerate, your mindset was completely different and stronger. And you felt like you were running circles around these youngsters that should be way fitter than you, but you've just got the upper hand, and it's a different
yeah,
feel completely.
yeah, that's true. That's true. So, yeah, so since I was the second in command of that phase, working for a lieutenant, our job was we had some administrative functions. The lieutenant had mostly administrative paperwork functions because you're going from classes that are 100 plus down to nothing. So you're processing a lot of people out essentially.
Right.
You are running Navy curriculum, so you're actually teaching classes and courses, and there are people that are coming in and spot checking and observing that. And I was responsible for making sure all the instructors were qualified and stayed qualified in all these classes. Again, something I never had any perception was even a requirement. And the if there were going to be any changes to the courses, we had to do the administration to get approvals for the changes to the way the courses would be run, the curriculum, the events, and all that, especially any physical events, because everything had been tested and developed over time. And there's a lot of wisdom baked in. And you didn't want somebody just to come along and just say, let's make it this or make it that. Because you change one little part of the experiment and it turns into a whole different outcome. So, for example, if you didn't make people carry boats on their heads at Bud's course, in 10 years, every SEAL would be 3 to 4 inches taller than prior generations
Mm,
because
okay.
because because carrying those boats hurts tall guys more than it hurts short guys. And this is
Mm-hmm.
something that they learned over time. So yeah, I mean, it's just little tiny tweaks can make big changes. So you have to be careful what you're doing. And there's a chain of people that have to approve almost anything that you try to adjust. You have very little latitude. Uh, everything's controlled. So the other part of that experience, besides going to college at night, was the whole mental game and realizing how much mental game was choreographed and contrived and watching the reactions of the students. So now you're seeing the cause and effect. You're always on the other side of it, but now you get to see if I do this, they do this. If I do this, they do that. If I do this, half the class does this, but the other half of the class does that. And you're seeing all the things I mentioned earlier about the look in their eyes and the way they act and their physical demeanor and their posture and do the officers step up and lead or do they crawl into their own little psychological fetal position and hope it all
Mm-hmm.
goes away? And it's unfair because they're people too, and just because they're officers, they haven't been prepared for this particular thing, but they are being asked to step up. And that's what I also realized. I call it the officer bubble or the leader bubble. And maybe you've experienced this. If you give somebody leadership in in a difficult situation, they they tend to get through the difficult situation better than everybody else because they are focusing on everybody else. They have far less time to focus on their own little owies and their own little concerns and their own frustrations or fears because they've got to get a head count. They got to get a group of people from point A to point B. I didn't really understand this until we ran out of some officers and we started just grabbing enlisted guys and putting them in charge of different
Right.
groups. And all of a sudden they were acting the same way. So it wasn't about rank. It was about you're in charge, you're the father figure. Now you're worried about your little ducklings, whatever. You're not concerned about yourself so much. And the
Mm-hmm.
attrition for officers has always been very, very low. And I don't think, if I'm that observation in those 2 years, and personal observation as a student, I don't think it was because they were officers or because they had a college degree. I think it was because they had a reason to focus on something outside of their own misery.
Okay. Okay.
So,
It's good. Good. Yeah. Good viewpoint, I suppose, of that. Now you mentioned about going over to being an officer yourself.
yeah.
What made you have that mindset that I'm going to switch over from what we would call an OR, an other rank, over to the officer aspect? Is it because of that was your next step in your career, or was someone that suggesting that maybe this would be a good stepping stone for yourself?
It was all economics. I had my second kid.
Oh, okay.
Eh, I had my second kid, and I was going to be up for senior chief at the same time I would have been going to officers candidate school. I looked at the pay differential for, say, another 5, 6 years. If I even if I made it to master chief, the difference between master chief and if I'd gone to the officer track started getting to be wider and wider, wider economically.
Okay.
And and then there, eventually, if I'm going to retire as a SEAL, there's even a bigger gap. So that was the struggle in my mind was that against the opinion in probably all special ops units that officers aren't really needed and the enlisted guys rule the world. And there are units in special units inside of say U.S. Marine Corps, like the recon guys, the Army Rangers in Vietnam, which were then reconnaissance guys. They weren't taking down airfields and things, and they went out in 6-man teams without officers. There is a tradition of that, and in the SEAL teams, the officers went along, but the officers had to do everything that enlisted guys had to do, and vice versa. And in combat, there were enlisted guys that ran missions, you know, from time to time, and they didn't do any worse than the officers. So there was a different kind of appreciation of the enlisted experience and the depth of experience. And for me to get to the apex of that food chain and then say, nah, now I want to be an idiot brand new officer.
Mm.
To my peer group, it looked like suicide or stupidity or a combination of both. So I had a lot of that pressure, and anybody I mentioned it to, that's pretty much the feedback I got. Do you want to be king of the hills and master chief in a SEAL team, or do you want to be some low life ensign, a first lieutenant or something? And I didn't want that, but then I kept looking at, okay, how am I going to pay for these kids and all that? So that ultimately was what decided it for me was the difference in pay.
Okay. And you mentioned about completing a degree. Is that right? Whilst you
Yeah,
were there,
yeah,
how did you find that alongside running, all the different classes?
yeah. It sucked. We had one car. San Diego's very, very expensive, and we weren't getting paid a whole lot in those days. So I rode a 10-speed bike 13 miles in from south of where Coronado and the school was every morning. I came in early if I had anything to do with the physical training. Sometimes I led PT, calisthenics and all that stuff. And I usually had to be there if I wasn't leading it. And then we got through the day. Again, you may or may not swim with some of the student events. You might be running with some of them. And then around 4 o'clock, I would leave 4:30. I would ride the bike 13 miles back, and then I would get in the car and I would drive to night school. And then I'd get home around 11:30 after get through all the San Diego traffic, and I'd do it all over again for 2 years.
Wow.
And my wife had the car for the day. If she had doctor's appointments and stuff, or she wanted to take the kids, whatever. And the yeah, I think I just had to suck it up and do it. I think I got something out. I mean, I was doing my business administration um, degree, so I think I got a lot out of the learning, but not as much as I could have because I was kind of in a half-ass state of fatigue and brain brain fog almost all the time.
Right.
Yeah, but I really got strong legs from the bicycle riding.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. I bet.